The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Hey, it's me, Tyler. Bose open earbuds are stylish. The color, it looks almost like an earring. I feel like it could go with anything. The music I'm making right now feels like a holiday. I want to look like it too. Check out Bose.com for more.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by SparkLab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about SparkLab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to Business is Boring. AI, smart cities, and the future of urban living are some of the hottest topics in tech today, and few people are shaping these areas more than Dr. Ayesha Khanna. As the co-founder and CEO of Addo, an AI advisory firm, Ayesha has dedicated her career to ensuring that technology serves society in meaningful ways. But calling her a CEO doesn't quite cover the impact she's had. She's a futurist, thought leader in the ethics of AI, and a mentor who's passionate about encouraging diversity in tech. Dr. Khanna's work has spanned continents, from advising on smart city initiatives in Asia to driving AI strategy for Fortune 500 companies. Her perspective on ethical AI, combined with her work to empower young women through her nonprofit 21st Century Girls, demonstrates her commitment to a future where technology supports and uplifts all of us. Today, she'll share her thoughts on the future of AI, how smart cities can shape better lives, and her ongoing mission to promote responsible, inclusive tech. In town, as part of the Spark Accelerate Summit, it's an honour to have her here with us. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Ayesha Khanna. Tēnā koe.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, so tell us about your influences and coming into the space of ethical AI. As you came out of economics at Harvard, operations at Columbia, a PhD in information systems from the London School of Economics, a really diverse kind of background in a lot of the building blocks of like commerce and society, right?
Yeah, so I grew up in Pakistan, and when I was there, obviously in developing countries, you see so much injustice, poverty, you see discrimination against minorities, against women, but also you see so much potential in the same countries, so much talent, so much that can come from infrastructure and healthcare. So that's where I wanted to focus my work, on development economics. And after I went to Harvard, I became interested in literature and art, and I was very into Russian literature and surrealism and the philosophy of development economics. But then I met all of these math Olympiads from Russia, Romania, and Bulgaria, Croatia, and they had been taught science and math in a way that just blew my mind. For me in Asia, it was always about a test. You knew the answer to the experiment before you even did the experiment. There was always a right answer and a wrong answer. And I found that super boring, not creative at all, so I had no interest in it. But they approached science, computer science, physics, math, as a quest to learn the truth. They didn't think there was always a definitive answer. They talked about elegance of how you wrote algorithms. And they were equally comfortable talking about Borges and labyrinths, or Rilke and his work, and of course, number theory and graph theory. And for me, something just clicked. it meant that my love for humanities and creativity was as relevant in the sciences as well. And when they introduced me to neural networks in my senior year at college, I just found it fascinating because it could solve things. It could optimize, forecast using numbers in very creative ways. So the way I came to artificial intelligence was primarily through a love of creativity and a love for tinkering, and not because I was looking for any deterministic, mechanistic outcome. And I think that's the right way to look at it, because when you look at it that way, it just opens up the entire world of possibilities, and no discipline is not good enough or not appropriate to apply AI to.
I love that. And that idea that these ideas live inside the world of philosophy or even the way people talk about music or abstract ideas as opposed to things with a deterministic right or wrong answer is so lovely, as it's such a big kind of question what the role of AI is going to have in all of our lives. But we can shape that, right?
We can 100% shape that. And one of the big questions is, how should we educate our youth to live in an AI world? And certainly the answer is not that they should be siloed in the way that they approach education. They should study both the humanities and the sciences. They should study their philosophy and their mathematics. And by doing so, they will be able to connect the dots between what a good society should be and what can be achieved to empower that society and whatever career they want with a technology like AI.
How did you go about getting into the field and kind of bridging this gap between corporate work and, these really interesting, like, philosophical ideas?
Well, I started off on Wall Street as a software engineer. And I remember at that time, my family, because they were quite disappointed. My parents were okay, but my extended family in Pakistan said, oh my God, you could have gone to an investment bank, a consulting company, the World Bank, but you just want to be a software engineer? They didn't understand it at that time at all. Of course, now all my uncles send me articles on artificial intelligence. But I started off by implementing the code that very smart mathematicians and physicians would write for algorithmic trading, which is using financial forecasting to actually begin to decide where you would trade, to use statistical models to manage the risk and to hedge against the risks. And I began to see how it improved productivity. And I then worked as a consultant on many banks, on many projects across banks in New York for 12 years, working on wealth management, risk management, business intelligence, and so on. But at some point, it occurred to me that this was way bigger than the financial services, and that this would impact entire cities, for example. And that's how I decided to get into the area of what we now call smart cities, which is how do you apply information, infrastructure, and AI algorithms to entire healthcare, education, transport, infrastructure of a city to make sure that it's not just about productivity, it's about sustainability, it's also about meaning of work, it's about energy, it's about healthcare. And that's how I got into my PhD, which was on studying a sustainable transport system in Berlin. And they were using artificial intelligence to create this ecosystem and pilot it. And that's how I remerged my love between economics, society, and artificial intelligence. And then I never looked back. After that, I started my consulting firm. I have corporate clients. I have government agencies. I started talking more about ethics and AI. And I found a lot more meaning in that than I did to be just doing the corporate world alone.
That consultancy you started, Addo, tell us about that, as it's a really interesting point you make that, all of these systems that come together, they're in the service of, productivity and et cetera, but they're also in the service, especially in the context of cities, around connection and amenity. And, there's something in this funny moment in AI where it feels all computery and like a graph diagram of a network or something. But really, most of this data links back to people and the way they move or connect with people, right?
Yes, and I want to point out that great leaders of corporate companies also very much now think about how to do AI responsibly. So we have many healthcare clients and healthcare ministries, government ministries as our clients. And I find that there is a great anchor in the leadership in the fact that it's about better clinical outcomes, better patient experience, better service rather than just profitability. And we're beginning to see, even I sit on the boards of companies, the leaders are truly dedicated to sustainably, to having sustainable practices to make sure that the AI and the Internet of Things technology that they're using is really to build a greener, better planet. So I'm a big believer in corporations and city governments acting in the interests of stakeholders. In a city in itself, if you look at a government, there are the pillars of the foundation of a healthy society. There's education, healthcare, transport, energy, and now increasingly compute infrastructure so that people can use AI, people can use algorithms to actually make these things more operationally efficient. And when that happens, you give people more quality of time to spend with their families because they're more productive, so they have more meaningful time left. When you make transport more optimized, you have less time that people spend commuting. And when you actually teach people about the skills that they need in the next industrial revolution, what they call the fourth industrial revolution, then you give them the power of social mobility. And that's what you want to do. You want to give everyone a very good baseline quality of life as a government, and then you want to empower them to leap forward and kind of, write their own story about how they'll amplify their potential and create a better world for themselves and their children.
That's so interesting to do this kind of social and structural change at the city level and not at the state or federation or country level. Tell us about that.
Well, I live in Singapore. It's a city-state. So it's very unusual in that way because the state, the nation and the city are very closely aligned with in their goals. If you go to a country like the United States, for instance, you find that the states will have certain regulations and the federal government may have other regulations, and they don't always align on how they see a particular issue. Certainly that's true of large countries. But smaller countries have this advantage, like Estonia also, where you can actually have a policy that is of a smart city and you become essentially a smart nation. And when you are not able to do that as a big country, then it is the responsibility of the mayors of every city to implement all of the policies that are needed. So, for example, in a very large country in Asia, we worked on a national strategy they had on how to prepare for the next, God forbid, pandemic. And so the idea was that if you do that, how can you connect in all the different cities, the hospitals with the public transport system, in order to understand the inflow of people who may be infected, to understand how many beds are taken up, to then be able to know where you should have smart lockdowns in order to prevent the spread of the infection. So this is kind of called a smart city command center. A command center is one in which you have lots of different data coming in and you're able to have a strategy, for example, of a crisis response strategy that's very comprehensive and protects the population from disaster. So command centers, whether they're in police or healthcare or others, are these new types of centers that we'll see in more and more cities, which are using for policymakers and government officials, give them the data they need from different sources to make intelligent decisions.
And it makes so much sense when things like education, healthcare, environmental resources, policing, all of those happen at a city level, and they'll have obviously very different contexts and very different inputs depending on the city,
Yes.
right? And so you start there. But and then are there many things in common, but the application is unique to each kind of city and context?
Well, yes. So one of the things is, where is your starting point? Whether you are a government agency or a corporation, you may think, oh my God, my data is a mess. My data is all over the place. But then you see the CEOs or the mayors of some cities coming on the cover of magazines claiming that, we're now an AI company. We're so great. We have invested so much. And actually, a large majority of the time, that's not true. That's just publicity.
It's just marketing.
That's just marketing. And I understand their desire to do that. But in most companies still, we see that they are at early stages of their AI maturity and their digital and data maturity, and that's fine. So you can start off wherever you are by organizing this gold that you're sitting on, which is the data. For a city agency, you have to be, and otherwise, even for a corporation, this data, you have a responsibility to keep it private and to keep it safe. So if you're going to organize your data, you're going to use it to personalize citizen experiences or improve them. One of the most important things is to do it responsibly. And that means you protect your data, you keep it private, you protect it from cyber hacking. Then, depending on your interagency collaboration, which again, in some cities is much more, in others can be politically rife. So then you can have a strategy. And we call this a prioritization, right? You don't want to bulldoze something. You want to bring, whether it's a corporation, department by department, or whether it's a nation, city by city, agency by agency, along the journey, and you want to be able to achieve what you can achieve in the beginning. So that means that you're going to be able to just do traffic optimization in one part of the city, and then it won't really connect with your healthcare system for your ambulatory needs. Well, so be it then. But then your next phase, if both have now organized their data and you have a policy for them to exchange that data with each other, then that's the next step. But it's complicated. It takes time because this is sensitive data.
And to round out kind of the big themes of your work, tell us about 21st Century Girls and the work you're doing there around equity and inclusion.
Yes, it's a big passion of mine. So 21st Century Girls was a nonprofit that I ran for 10 years in Singapore. It started off because I was at a hackathon for kids. And, all these kids were making little electronic robots. And I was at a table. And this young girl came, and she was so talented. She was able to quickly put it together, and she had so many interesting questions. But then I noticed her mother came and kind of said, oh, she's not interested in this, and put her brother in front of me instead and took her daughter to another table. And I felt really sad. I realized there's this unconscious bias. No mom would not want the best for her child. It's just that we have an unconscious bias against women being able to do certain kinds of engineering and STEM tasks, especially in Asia. And so eventually the good part of the story is her grandmother brought her back, and both brother and sister had a great time. But I was motivated to start 21st Century Girls, and we've educated in partnership with Google, Visa, PayPal, Nanyang Polytechnic, thousands of children and girls in the basics of coding, in the basics of AI. And now it's been picked up by a lot of different schools and universities. So my next mission is to actually focus on mid-career women. Because once you have more girls studying computer science, then why is it that at some point they move away from tech? Is it because they had children, they cared for the elderly, they got married? Is it because of they went through different kinds of periods in their cycle? And that is called the broken rung on the ladder. And so my next now big project is Amplify, which is this platform to educate mid-career women on how to excel and remain in a digital world really empowered to thrive and succeed.
Yeah, I love that. And there's so much data around women who have education and qualifications. Their children are the most likely to be educated and have qualifications, right?
Yes.
So the way in many ways to get to children is through the mothers.
It is very true. And actually, women they're very interested in lifelong education also. Because if there was this incidence of this fintech company in India where they were giving out loans, and a lot of the men were taking the loans to buy cars or motorcycles or TVs, and they realized in second-tier cities in India, women were taking these loans to fund data science courses for themselves. They wanted to learn data science. They wanted to learn data analytics. They wanted to be able to work from home remotely. And there is a great desire for women to have coaching, to have skills training, which then they not only pass on to their children, but they become financially independent. And now for the first time in the entire world, we're seeing women, educated women from China to Indonesia to India to America, moving up the workforce. And when they do that, if you empower them, can you imagine the boost that would give to the economic and competitive engine of any country? It'd be amazing.
Yeah, wonderful. And we'll be back in a moment to talk with Dr. Ayesha Khanna about the potential impacts of AI and how to make sure we build ethically and responsibly. Hoki mai anō. Welcome back to Business is Boring. So we've talked a little bit about the need for ethical and responsible approaches to building AI. What are some frameworks to think about this? And what does that mean in the context of this very fast and developing space, right?
I find very useful to start with what goes wrong if you don't do ethics. Because it's otherwise it seems like I'm just preaching, and we're all just preaching. You have to be a good person, you have to be a good country, but it's really not about that. As there are real consequences to not having proper governance. And so I'll give you some examples. Number one, if you don't have proper governance, then you have discrimination and bias. So we've seen in the United States, there was this program that was an AI program that was providing recommendations to judges on whether to grant parole or not to certain prisoners. And after a while, the activists began to notice that the AI was consistently denying parole to African Americans. So you may say, why is that? And the reason was because the data was biased. Because historically, there's been a bias, and the AI just learns from the data that's fed it. So data governance, making sure that the data is balanced, it's checked, is very, very important. If you don't have guidelines for that, then you have all of these AI systems running around just being biased around the world. Number two, it hallucinates generative AI, which means, and that's just like a kind of it's a nice word for saying that it actually makes factual errors. And that's a very dangerous thing. There's nothing sweet about it. And you ask it a question, it would give you the wrong answer. And it doesn't give the wrong answer because AI is malicious. It's just an algorithm. It's generating new content. So you have to control it. And the way to control it is to manage the risks and the circumstances, under circumstances such as healthcare, for example, you have to be very strict that you have these risk management techniques under control. On the one hand, having an AI can help you detect cancer faster. Fantastic. On the other hand, it can also make mistakes. It can say there's cancer when there's no cancer. It can just blurt it out to a patient on a customer service chat. These are not good ways. It creates anxiety. It creates more bureaucracy and mistakes. So it's not that AI is bad, but for every time you have something good, you have some unintended consequence or you have a laziness on the part of the discipline of governance. And these are just a few examples that are very prominent, but there are many others. For example, there's deep fakes, there's IP theft, there is the ability to manipulate people. So there's this huge area now of people interacting with AI friends. Millions of people have AI boyfriends and girlfriends from China to the United States to all over the world. They spend hours chatting with them. And there was this terrible case where this 15-year-old young man committed suicide after obsessively chatting with a chatbot. And his mom has sued Character.ai for not alerting her when it began to notice such things. And that's why in Australia, they are now going to have a very strict law banning TikTok and X and others from children under 16. So governance is about celebrating everything that's great about AI, but also mitigating its risk constantly. And there are very good practices for how to do that. But people, in their excitement, sometimes can become very naive and not realize that. And so I think that's why we need ethical governance. Because if we don't do that, we harm citizens, we harm children, we harm the very system that's supposed to support us.
What kind of frameworks can people start to bring in to do this? As a lot of these things about good governance, forward thinking, being considered, all of these are quite absent in a lot of the actions where, whether it's Twitter's AI having far fewer controls than other AI that are AI models that are out there, whether it's Meta actually releasing their entire code so it can be out anywhere. There are a number of things happening that do not speak of care and consideration.
So the good news is that there are frameworks out there, like NIST, which is a framework from the United States. There's also the EU framework. There's the ISO framework. You don't need to be a techie or an AI engineer to understand it. And I'd really hope that all the listeners on this call realize that AI is something that they can use in their work, in their business, and they can also ensure that it is well governed by asking the right questions of the AI engineers that they're working with. So the NIST framework says, okay, first of all, you need to be able to map all the ways that you're using AI in your organization, in your team, or in your life as a mother or father or a child. And once you do that, you have a list of what we call use cases. So, for example, you can say in a bank, I'm using it to decide whether somebody should get a loan or not. In a bank, I'm using it to help recommend what trades to make. And then for each one of them, you measure the risk. So it's called map, then it's called measure. Measure means then you say, oh, what's the risk? Well, looks like there could be bias here, so we better check on that. Looks like the data is not good quality. Looks like the personality of the chatbot is one, people are talking a lot to it and they could get attached to it. And the final thing is, once you've measured the risk, then you attack the most high risk ones and you immediately start to put on risk mitigation. And that is called managing risk. So it's measure, map, manage. And I think anybody can understand that. And every company and organization needs to have a team that actually puts these in process. And they can call the framework whatever they want. But, and the thing then is people say, well, now what should the technology team do? For the technology team, there are a set of frameworks and libraries also against these logical three pillars. IMDA, for example, is a Singapore government agency that's responsible for building its digital economy, governing AI, for example, as well. And it has released an open source software called AI Verify that any company or government agency can use in the world to check whether its AI has certain of these issues that are what we know as major risks. So that is one framework and software available. Others are available as well. New risks come up, yes, but our job is to anticipate the new risks. And at least for the current risk, we have to make sure we use these tools and frameworks out there to make sure the risk is mitigated.
There are some things that are so inherent in AI, like the positive and negative side of productivity gains, and, like so many great new technologies, it's the same story, right? Like the industrialization of the world and computers in general and the internet. But it's a similar story, but it feels a very powerful likely outcome of AI adoption will be being able to do more with less, which will have impacts on life, connection, employment, people's purpose. How can or how should we be thinking about these potential impacts, and where do they come up in the kind of ethical frameworks?
So this is a very important question. And the last thing we should do is put our head in the sand like an ostrich and pretend it's not happening. There are going to be a lot of tasks that are going to be automated. We're already seeing that for call centers, for example, AI is being used to answer 90% of the questions in some cases that are asked for by customers. We are already seeing in factories that humanoid robots are being used in automotive factories to do some of the work that factory workers are doing. So the question then becomes, will I still have a job? Will my job be irrelevant? Will my job be automated? And the answer is, your job description will evolve. So today, if you are a lawyer, you have to do case precedents, you have to draft contracts, you have to talk to your client. In the future, and even now, we have AI agents or AI assistants, and they actually go through all the documents that are public or otherwise with an AI assistant like Harvey AI, and they also draft the content and the contract for you. They also check for anomalies in it. So now, does that mean you're not needed? No, it does mean you'll have maybe 20% more time. And if you're smart about that 20% more time, then you can maybe take on 2% more clients. You can spend more time with your clients. You can grow the firm. You can also put in your job description that you are a strategy for different clients. Maybe you take on a new kind of vertical. Apart from tax, you take on IP. And then your job description also includes that you work with AI agents. By the way, on LinkedIn, recruiters are saying that a lot of companies are now asking in your CV, can you actually work with AI agents or not? So they don't become irrelevant. No job becomes irrelevant, but it changes. We know, for example, that doctors spend so much time noting down a person's medical symptoms that they don't have time to actually focus on the patient. And that they're actually burnt out because after the patient leaves, they have to input all of this administrative documentation. But now there are AI agents like a Bridge that are literally on a mobile phone. They sit there and with the patient's permission, they document and transcribe all the conversation that happens and automatically put it in medical language in a system that the doctor can check. And patients and doctors are both saying this is great. So the question then is, why wouldn't doctors use that? Does that mean you don't need a doctor? No, of course you need the doctor. Does that mean the doctor should know how to work with AI? Yes. Does that mean the doctor should maybe go into entirely new ways of curing diseases, like new therapies, for example? Yes. We all have to evolve. I think the bottom line is we have to evolve and push ourselves to upskill ourselves to do more with AI and also in our field to be able to do more high-value things. And I can guarantee you that those who do that will not, in the immediate future at least, find that they are less marketable. They'll find that there's a much greater demand for them in the economy.
It also feels like this could be the start of another great wave of empowerment and access, in that many people who couldn't go to expensive schools or places that gate-kept knowledge or understanding or access now are able to use, or will be able to use into the future, AI to learn and upskill across all kinds of areas, right? And all kinds of people who wouldn't have been able to do things will, which has a special opportunity for impact in places that have been locked out of the most opportunity, right?
I 100% agree with you. And I feel so strongly about this because people say that this is going to create a digital divide between people who have AI and don't have AI. But actually, I think it's going to create a convergence because people who did not have access to good education will now have a personal AI tutor on their mobile phone. People who did not have access to good health care and so were nutritionally deficient or didn't know how to take care of themselves can now, before they have a chronic disease, get telehealth or an AI assistant to a doctor helping them answer questions. And then the question becomes, well, what do you need for that? You need infrastructure and AI infrastructure investment by a government or by a large corporate. So in India, for example, there is a company called Sarvam AI that allows people to talk in their own language, and there's so many languages in India, and it's at a penny a minute. It's available. So it's available cheaply for them to access this AI, whether you're a man, a woman, elderly, young, poor, rich. Your daddy's connections don't matter. It doesn't matter if you have a bicycle or a Mercedes. It's completely democratic. In Africa, Google has released Google Translate in 25 languages. That means if you're a housewife in Kenya and you want to do business with a small business that will sell your homemade soaps in Cape Town in South Africa, you can now tell them about it, and the chatbot would automatically translate it from the language that they speak in another part of Africa. Just imagine the opportunities this opens up. This is not just about education. It's about healthcare. It's about e-commerce. It's about freeing up these barriers, these frictions that people have had traditionally, which are so unjust and unfair. I mean, look at the two of us. We're sitting here. Why? By stroke of luck, depending on where we were born. Why are we not playing with pebbles in some very poor part of some country? And so I think that injustice, it is time that we use these technologies to empower everyone. And for people like me and my kids, it means they'll have more colleagues, they'll have more peers, they'll have more opportunities to build great things together.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and it often gets forgotten in that we know that talent is pretty evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. And so there's an awful lot of people who are locked out of that opportunity, right? And tell us about the work that you're here to do at the Spark Accelerate conference and how this fits in with the themes of your work.
I'm so pleased to be here. I love New Zealand and have been here quite a few times. At Accelerate Spark, I am going to talk a little bit about how Singapore approaches artificial intelligence. The country wants to be one of the leading AI-enabled economies in the world. But its approach to smart cities is not about AI. It's about a meaningful life. It's about empathy, equity. It's about ethics. And I kind of tell people how it approaches, for example, how to create a meaningful place for its elderly. So Singapore is one of the fastest aging population in Asia. And there are many ways in which you can serve the elderly. The techie approach would be, oh my God, let's just put sensors everywhere. And if they fall, we can tell if they fall. And then, let's have personalized medicine. And all of that is there. But the elderly don't just die of injuries. That's definitely one of them. They also die of loneliness and accidents. So Singapore is creating these entire new, they're called kampungs. Kampungs is like a village. It's an integrated, publicly subsidized housing that has that has places for the elderly, and their apartments are outfitted with sensors and AI in case they fall or in case they need a personal emergency button. But then it also has kindergartens in it. It has athletic sports in it. It has young people and movie theaters in it, a lot of green spaces. And the idea is that there's lots of AI, there's lots of technology, But when you walk through it, it's really a beautiful, harmonious space where people can live together and thrive. And so the intentionality of AI is so important, whether you approach it as a country or as a corporation. And I think that the national AI strategy of Singapore, and as a Singaporean, I'm very proud of this, is also specifically about that. It's about empowering people. It's about its governance. And it's not AI for its own sake.
I love that. And what a great example of making something beautiful and human with AI. As a final thought, what will your definition of success be with your work in the world of AI and helping people think about ways to bring in ethical and responsible thinking and make beautiful things?
I mean, for me, at this stage in my career and life, it's very important for me to be authentic to what I believe in. And I really believe that AI is a transformative force, and our relationship with AI is one that's philosophical, and that we should approach it from a viewpoint of agency, which means we partner with AI to do what we need it to do in order to build a better society for ourselves. And that means that we should not be fearful of it, and that we should engage with it, but also know how to critically evaluate it. That word agency in respect to AI, the more people have that, the more I can teach that through my platforms, through my work with corporations and governments and boards, the more I will consider my life a success.
I love it. Well, thank you for coming and sharing some of your work and principles with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat.
Thank you. This was so awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to Dr. Ayesha Khanna. Thank you very much to everyone for listening and having us along, and to everyone who helps make this happen, like our producer, Te Aihe Butler. If you do like what we do, please do rate and leave a review. It really does help. E noho rā.
From the Spin-Off Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz.
Does your brand have something important to say through meaningful messaging that reaches the right audience? At The Spin-Off, we work closely with our partners to create bespoke campaigns that bring value to both your brand and our audience. If you're interested in learning more about partnering with us, email Beck, that's BEC, at thespinoff.co.nz.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.